Good morning, everybody. My name is Dale Jablonsky. Welcome to the first ever Government Transformation Conference here in Sacramento. This is a subject matter that is very near and dear to my heart. If you kind of look at my LinkedIn site over the last 10 years, it's been one of my passions is facilitating transformation. So when I heard this conference was going to happen, I was like first in line to be part of the advisory board and everything, and to get an education session going. And I'm happy to have some of my most esteemed colleagues here. Craig Grivette, a managing director for KPMG, a government official for many years, and also a solution provider out there in the consulting world, and Chris Reeve. He's our Health and Human Services West Coast lead, and also has a long career in re-engineering government systems for the purpose of the transformation. So we're going to kind of just give you a little bit of a journey on what we've learned over the years, some of the gotchas and implications as you go down this road. I believe that government is pretty much untransformed. We're still the Borders bookstore that doesn't know, that there's a better model out there, by and large, and it's evidenced just by the service delivery and the bad customer experiences that are going on. But there are bright and shining examples that we're going to try to bring to light here, and there are some even here in California in terms of what's happening in the transformation. So there are good examples, and there are ways out of our untransformed dilemma. So this is going to be fairly interactive. We're going to kind of just talk, but you guys need to participate as much as you can so that it makes sense to all of you. There's going to be some interesting concepts on service delivery and legacy systems, and what really is customer experience, and what are those expectations and how they're shifting. Okay, so speak up, raise your hand, say, hey, Dale, Craig, Chris, whatever. So our title is customer experience, and that's an interesting thing. We say we're customer focused, but who's really the final judge of that is kind of the customer. And when you say great government customer experience, that's kind of an oxymoron, right? Because a lot of customer experience is buried in long lines, long wait times, and a one-size-fits-all kind of model that isn't what government's all about. So again, our panel here has a lot of experience in this space. So Craig, can you kind of tell us what's driving this increased demand for customer experience from your standpoint?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think there are a lot of things that are driving, the need to transform government that ultimately come down to the interaction between the public and the government entities, right? I think there are at least two sides of that. I'm going to talk for just a second about the one side of it, which is the government side, right? I mean, I think there's a really strong, legitimate need to push customer service out in ever increasing innovative ways, right? I think the need to automate the interaction with the public is one where government is being asked to do more with less, right? The old adage of, you've been asked to do so much for so long with so little, then now you can do everything with nothing, right? There is a very strong need for government to look at automating its business differently and transforming the interaction so that greater mileage can be attained through the investments that you are making, whether those investments be in technology or in staff or in contractual relationships that you might have and so forth, right? You want to get as much out of that as you possibly can. And a big part of that is pushing the envelope of that interaction closer and closer to the customer. The more in the, you know, as Dale said, sort of in the bowels of the organization, that you have to draw the customer in order to engage with you, the more expensive that's going to be for government, the more time consuming it's going to be for your staff, right? The more process laden it's going to be, you know, everything becomes more challenging the further into your organization that transaction has to flow, right? So there's a really strong business case from the government side to engage. And I see this all the time. I've had no fewer than 4 conversations this morning about this exact topic, right? How do we move that transaction out closer to the customer, to the citizen, to the regulated entity, you know, et cetera, so that we can reduce the cycle time within our organization, so that you know, that can you know, help them, you know, either contain budgets or expand service offerings with a limited budget, right? So I think that's at least half of it. And I know, Chris, you spend a lot of time on the other half.
I think we have a quick question here before we get into Chris's.
So how far do we know to push? Do we push until we get the resistance back, or just push away?
Well, you're talking about like with
Customer base.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I mean, it's a great question, right? I think the you know, the points that, you know, that I'm making on the government business case, right, you know, is like, you know, a pretty one-sided one, right? It's like, hey, let's do this because it's in the interest of making government more efficient internally, right? I think that you know, what Chris is about to talk about is the pull side of that, right? Which is that the customers also expect to be served better, right? And so they want to participate in that. And I think ultimately the answer to your question is that sort of balancing point, right? There are probably a couple curves, you know, in that chart that overlap at some point, right? And so there's going to be marginal return equals, you know, marginal investment, and you're going to see that inflection point where they cross over, and that's ultimately where it's going to be. That's going to be different for every organization, right? A lot of it depends on, you know, how transactional the relationship is versus how long-term the relationship is. And each of the agencies and each of the entities, either represented in this room or elsewhere, has a different, you know, a different relationship with its customer.
Yeah, I think you covered most of it. No, and I think it really is the flip side, right? Of, you know, how much do you push? But I think, you know, the pull is really, I wouldn't say it's insatiable right now, but, you know, the ubiquity of, you know, tools. I mean, everyone has a smartphone. You know, I'm not super smart, but I have my smartphone, and, you know, the ability to you know, perform a lot of different actions using your smartphone, using your laptop, using either, you know, a kiosk. You know, people are used to that. You know, I mean, we're starting to see some real generational differences in terms of those expectations. You know, people, as Dale was saying, people don't want to wait in line, you know, for services they can do on demand when they want to do them. You know, you can sit at home and do these things. And we were talking about our kids yesterday. I mean, you know, back in the days when we used to go into banks, for instance, you know, and stand in a teller line, you know, that really was transformed when we started having, you know, ATMs, and it's transformed even more with online banking. And, you know, I'm still a little bit of a Luddite. I'll go in with a check and, you know, hand it to the teller. You know, our kids take a picture of it with their smartphone, and it, you know, it's there. And so I think, you know, as we move generationally down that path, those expectations are really changing. You know, and I think, you know, the drive here is, I'm not sure that we can, you know, meet necessarily all the demand for the pull by pushing, but it is a, you know, sort of stepwise journey, and as Craig was suggesting, it is very particular to each, you know, organization's experience and need.
So how do you balance, I'm in IT, so you have some folks who are really computer literate, and then some that are just like nothing. And you can't tell, when you're speaking to someone on the phone or if there's an email, you can't determine age.
Right.
So how do you balance, you know, giving someone step-by-step instructions versus someone that's younger, right, who you can tell them what, you know, do this, this, and this, and this, and I mean, they're way ahead of you.
Right.
So how do you balance that?
Yeah, so I think, well, you know, we're not suggesting that there's ever going to be a, you know, ever, you know, a pull away completely from having a, you know, face-to-face customer experience. I mean, some services demand that. You know, you have to sometimes have those in-person interviews or in-person experiences. But, you know, if you can take, you know, 80% of that experience and drive it to the consumer or the client, the cost and ROI is enormous. There are, that's why one of the things we'll talk about is this, kind of fancy word, omni-channel or multi-channel. Some programs, I work in health and human services, it is an absolute statutory requirement that you provide a means for people to use paper applications, for instance, right? But that doesn't mean that people have to use them. So, providing people with some online ability to apply for services, to see the status of an application, to look at their case information, really reduces that reliance. You're always going to have people that want to walk in and have that customer experience, but we're seeing that is, becoming less and less over time.
Yeah, I mean, without maybe going into this particular aspect too much, if we just take a look at something that everybody's familiar with in terms of like the airline industry, right? There was a model where everybody had to go in, check in, get a ticket, and so forth, right? And various airlines have pushed this envelope more and more and more, right? And then it started becoming like, well, then you got to go to a kiosk and do it, right? And it's like, oh, at first you're like, oh, this is so bad because now they've pushed me to like an ATM. But then all of a sudden you're like, wait a second, it's like way easier and it's way faster. So, the customer service experience actually got better by automating that. And now, people walk through the line at TSA with their phone, right? Now they're not even printing out paper, right? And, it went from, printing out at a kiosk there to printing it out at home and coming in with your own paper, right? They're just continuing to evolve that. But you know what? You still can walk up to the teller, or to the agent and get your printed out ticket, right? This omnidirectional customer service model will likely always exist within government. It's really about expanding the array of those so that where possible, you can take advantage of the mutual efficiencies between the push and the pull, right? And you're never going to get to a harmonized extreme. That harmony is always going to exist somewhere in the middle, right? So.
Yep. It's just having those other channels available and moving some significant portion to those self-service channels allows you to do intensive services to those that still need it, and right now my only channel is the intermediary channel. I don't have any self-service. You can't give good service to those that need it because you're trying to be a one-size-fits-all to everybody, and they're all queued up and they're all angry and they're not getting that customer experience that they deserve.
But it's actually a great segue question. That's one of the things we're going to cover next is talking about some of the barriers, and then talking about it's kind of that journey that you need to take, right? I mean, this is where we're starting with the customer experience as the aspirational endpoint, or defining kind of what that is, and it's we can't just drop a number of technologies or self-service options on people without sort of going through the journey, and we'll kind of talk about that a little bit too.
Michael Greenlow here, who's from unemployment insurance, and I lived a nightmare when unemployment insurance went, from 6% or 5% to almost 15%, and that was a nightmare when we didn't have self-service ready. Right, Michael?
Yes.
Thank you for bringing up those scars for him.
Oh, I still wake up at night in a
chair.
cold sweat.
Yeah.
Yep. So, all right. So, let's just say we all agree that customer experience is worth pursuing. There's barriers, right? And I've heard this over and over again. I've got these business barriers. Could be a lot of things. Some of it is organizational. We're not ready. Some of that could be technologies not enabling me. I've got a 30-year-old legacy system, and the only prospect I see is ripping and replacing that thing at $500 million of huge risk and very little reward because it works. But how do I convince people to fork out that kind of money to replace something that works? So can we kind of expand upon how there might be some options that people haven't considered in terms of dealing with some of these barriers?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Dale. So this is a hurdle that many organizations struggle to address, right? It is a transformation of your business model from a world where your technology essentially defines your business process to one where your business process is defining the technology, right? I think that is, it's been something we've been talking about for probably 15 years, right? And I think various agencies are at different points in that transformative process. But some agencies, had very substantial investments in very large, complex IT systems that, they basically have been running for, 2 decades, 3 decades, in some cases longer. And, the art of the possible for the organization is essentially defined by what that system is capable of doing, right? And so, people have modified their organization, sometimes the structure of their organizations, and certainly the expectations of how their staff work and how they engage with their citizen stakeholders differently. And so, that's a pretty significant, barrier that exists for many organizations. And the decision to modernize, right, that is not a trivial one, right? The idea of, as you say, Dale, investing, and you've been in some very, very large organizations, but even smaller organizations, have a tremendous amount of risk attached to, modernizing a system that maybe they don't understand that well, right? Maybe the people that put that system in place, are no longer part of the organization, right? They may not even be among the living, right, at this point, sadly, right? It's a situation where documentation is fairly inadequate, and the understanding that the organization has is basically from using the system, right? They've been using it, and many of your staff, the only way they've done their job is through that system for all of these years, right? So the idea of now modernizing that system to be more, customer-centric, or to be pushing that envelope out in a different automation model, the art of the possible is not even really well understood. And from a systems perspective, the data itself is also a risk, right? Many of our clients, many of the agencies we've had a chance to work with, they have very ambitious goals about exposing transactions out to the web and through, as Chris said, through kiosks and other methods. But when you want to do that, you think about all of the data and all of the challenges you have with your data, and trying to expose that, right? Many organizations struggle with, how do I even make that data ready to be, ready for exposure? The risk profile of exposing that data, very, very different when you're talking about internal process versus external process. And Dale, I know you went through a fairly massive effort at CalPERS to get that the data cleansed to the point where it could be shared. But many organizations simply say, as they move that envelope out and that transaction out closer to the client, that they have a day forward approach, where they say, we're only going to move transactions out where we don't have to rely on legacy data in terms of that exposure. Because if I have like health and human services eligibility data or tax data that, or regulatory data that maybe is not perfectly cleansed, maybe it's got duplications, maybe it's got errors in it, I can deal with that in my own organization, but I can't necessarily deal with exposing that out to the public, right? So there's a whole risk profile that has to be made in that. And a lot of it is about really understanding your systems, right? And getting things documented and comfortable, so you can actually make an informed decision about your options that are available to you. And right now, many people are stuck because they just don't know the systems they have.
I think that the kind of running partner with on the legacy system side is the sort of organizational process and just structure, right? I mean, a lot of the organizations are structured, and the processes and procedures are structured around 25, 30-year-old legacy systems. Oftentimes, there are a number of shadow systems and shadow processes and procedures that evolve over time. Just so that people, I mean, they're Herculean efforts sometimes to just get through the day of how do we process in a human services world an application or cases or people, or just the transactions that we need to. And one of the things that we, the ability to just support, that client-centric model is very much constrained by that, the organizational structure that, again, is built around the systems. we see an enormous amount of focus on the IT side and maybe transforming the systems, but oftentimes that organizational sort of redesign and process and procedure redesign lags behind that. So it's the wonder of we build these hundreds of millions of dollars worth of systems and tools, and the organization either can't absorb it, the clients can't use the systems because the processes and procedures around them are really not built in lockstep with with that transformation and as part of that journey.
So maybe I'd like to give you just an example, right? So we find a lot of agencies are looking at trying to move from, historically custom developed software solutions, to commercially available software packages, right? And that's a noble goal, right? There's a lot of virtue assigned, to that transformation, right? You get into a situation where now you have a vendor community that is investing in that platform and helping to evolve that over time. Lots and lots of merit to that decision. But, in order to get to that, right, understanding your business architecture and whether it actually maps, to a packaged application is pretty substantial, right? And then going through the business re-engineering to actually commit to that kind of transformation is hugely substantial, right? And if your organization is not willing to commit to that kind of transformation at the business architecture level, I don't care what kind of information or technical architecture you have, you're dead in the water, right? Don't do it, right? Just don't do it. And if you're thinking about the challenge, right? You really have to internalize what is the problem I'm trying to solve. Is it the fact that we're unhappy with how the back-end system operates? Or is it that there is capability that the current system is inflexible and can't provide? An online portal, management of unstructured content, delivery of emails out to my client base. If my old mainframe system doesn't offer that, is the answer necessarily replacing that, or is it maybe adjunct systems and those kinds of things, right? That can address those needs, right? If the core system if you're unwilling to modify the business architecture that orbits around that core system, maybe replacing that core system is not the right answer, right?
Yeah, I have a comment.
Yeah.
The situation sometimes is not very clear cut, and that is when the organization has to replace the system because it's no longer supported. Like Windows XP is going away,
yep.
SQL Server is going away, whatever the version that we're using. So we have to replace it.
Yep.
But at the same time, we're not mentally prepared to accept the cost. So done if we do and done if we don't, what advice do you have for us?
Well, it ultimately becomes a matter of picking the evil you're willing to live with, right? Much like I said, there's virtue of moving to the COTS, type platforms and so forth. When you do that, you're now also, on that journey for a very long time, right? That bus has left the station and then it has stops, and you're expected to behave a certain way at each one of those stops, right? You get forced upgrades, other things happen throughout the life cycle of that. The products get end of life, they come out of support, you get into extended support, all those things, right? I think taking the baseline of that conversation is whatever you're putting into play should have a life cycle plan attached to it, right? Nothing lasts forever. It's either, even if it's a custom code, you might be able to manage it longer, but even the platform that it sits on is at risk, right? So if you're on a mainframe, is the answer to replace the entire system, or is it just to re-platform it to, a more commodity server platform, be it Unix or Windows or what have you, right? Or is it, do we change the whole thing, right? Really taking a look at all of your options, right? In any particular case, you're absolutely right. There's going to be a compromise that has to be made. A lot of it has to do with how quickly you need to act and where your budget and time, continuums balance out, right? Because these short-term answers are almost always more expensive, right? And they create long-term problems. The long-term answers defer the value, but are more efficient in the long run, right? And so you just have to find your own organization's way of making the management decision about, which one of those compromises you want to live with. But you're absolutely right. There's no gloriously wonderful one answer that says, hey, this is our path to getting to a more modern customer-centric architecture, and we can do it for free and we can do it really quickly, right? Unfortunately, I'd love to have that product.
I used a technique of just exercising our disaster recovery process, and I said, let's see if we could live without this system for a week or two, and that's when they recognize the ROI. And if they recognize the ROI on that system, then they should recognize the sustainability burden that all IT comes with, and that is hardware, software needs to be constantly refreshed and upgraded. So, and the ROI is still there. Chances are, even with the newer versions, the ROI goes up. So,
but I think that back to the discussion around sort of that whole business architecture and the impact of change in an organization needs to be considered along with that. We have seen a lot of examples around the country where we're asked to come in because they think there's a problem with some aspect of their information technology organization, a system that's not working the way they want it to, and we see a huge disconnect oftentimes between the way users expect that it should work and the way the system actually works, because there was not that process re-engineering around the original development of the system, and over time you see this divergence from the system functionality and what people are doing, and it just becomes unsustainable. So sometimes bringing those kind of back into harmony can help solve those problems, but as you make that decision to either retool or upgrade, it's thinking along those same lines. What is the impact of my organization? What business processes and procedures do we know are going to be impacted by this, and how do we adjust based on this? So what new skills do people need? What kinds of changes do they need to make from their process perspective? How do we transform the work they're ultimately going to do? And I think we'll talk a little bit more about this, but as you get to that more client-centric model, that is in and of itself a huge transformation for your workforce. They go from being clerical workers, pushing paper around, just covered in paper daily, to what we like to refer to as more knowledge workers, throughout that this sort of new normal.
So, Dale, so along the lines of what you guys were just saying, is there anything that as maybe middle management or even at the baseline workforce that we can do to kind of bring it to the executive level that these things needs to happen? Is there any advice along those lines, how to bring it up?
I believe, understanding your true total cost of ownership, because that's where the argument has failed. We've built these systems over years, but we've never articulated the ongoing cost of ownership. So everything's underfunded. We're underfunded in terms of hardware and software budget. We're also underfunded in terms of the staff, because I've been in situations where we religiously paid for our software license, so we were entitled to all the new versions. So there wasn't any money needed to get the new version. We just didn't have enough staff. Or even if we had some staff available for this weekend to upgrade, guess what? The new version only ran on new hardware. And the old versions were so old that you had to do a massive hardware change. So everything's kind of intrinsically linked in this world of sustainability, and nobody's really explained to executives what that true burden is. But again, they see IT only as an expense. They don't see the investment side. And again, IT is notoriously bad at re-articulating that return on the investment. I proposed turning off some systems, and my response back from the business people was, I would have to hire 10 people if you turn that off. Well, 10 people is money, and guess what? It's more money than the upgrade cost. So let's choose wisely here, on what we're doing.
So Dale, I think those are really good points, and I think that many of you who work in that balance between management and IT, see that probably on a daily basis. But one thing I would say, just sort of taking the conversation to a broader point, is that one of the things that more and more agencies are doing from an IT perspective, and to improve the relationship between those organizations are removing some of the tension is they're actually no longer developing IT strategic plans, right? They're just having an organizational strategic plan, right? So if you have an agency information manual, right, which is probably required to produce, right, you know, those kinds of things, it's creating a natural separation between the technology enabling community, which gets viewed, as Dale said, as a cost center, right? Because there's no line item in the budget for IT. I mean, any of you have a budget that has a line item for IT? Even when I was at the data center, right? All we had was expenditure authority. I never had a dollar of my own, right? It was always DMVs or Caltrans or, you know, social services or somebody's, right? It's somebody else's money I was playing with, right? And so if you're at an agency and you're part of the IT organization, you're about delivering education, you're about delivering roadways, you're about, you know, delivering public safety. You know, you're not about delivering technology, right? That's an incidental, you know, to what we do, right? That's the means, right? And I think, you know, creating that harmony at an executive level and saying, listen, you know, we're going to make technology part of that business mission, right? Versus a separate agenda around technology, I think is one of the more leading practices that we're seeing in terms of breaking down the barriers that naturally exist to that engagement, right? And it's not a perfect fit, and there have been mixed results in that, but that is an emerging, probably better practice that we're seeing a lot.
So let's get on to a little bit more of the positive side of the barriers, and let's talk a little bit about the solutions, right? So we have these technology barriers, these organizational barriers. What are some of the different, maybe innovative techniques that you guys have seen around getting past these barriers into new ways of thinking and new types of solutions that get me closer and closer to my experience goals and my customer centricity goals that I'm after?
Well, the good news is there are some examples, and all of these exist on a continuum, you know, where organizations have either greater investments available to them, they have greater clarity on their business objectives, but you know, so you know that probably fall into a couple different areas, Dale. I think that we're seeing transformation happen where you know the legacy systems are left in place, and they're adding systems to an ecosystem around that, sort of surrounding the legacy systems, you know, with you know, components that help extend and expand on the customer delivery capabilities of those organizations. That tends to be sort of a near-term answer. You know, when that happens, we strongly encourage organizations to still be thinking about their long-term agenda, because the necessary result of that is that your cost structure goes up, right? Because you've sort of made the decision not to touch your core legacy system, but to put this orbiting, you know, set of systems around it. The other one is obviously to look at modernizing the core system. That obviously takes a much longer time frame. But there are some other things that are happening as well. So a lot of organizations now are really focusing more on shared services, you know, first and foremost within their own organizations. You know, one of the clients we're working with right now has actually built truly an enterprise service bus and is deploying services on that, that then all of the entities, all the divisions within their very large agency can then capitalize on those shared services. So, for example, you know, there are a series of line of business applications. Everybody's got like a licensing application or a case management application or, you know, a financial management application. All of those need reporting. All of them need security and identity management. All of them have unstructured content that orbits around their transactions, right? So they're starting to deploy these common services off of the enterprise service bus in a way that then allows all of these line of business applications to leverage those common services. The awesome part of that is that it shrinks the footprint and the risk of deploying and modernizing those core systems, because you're not having to go do 15 things successfully at once. You've shrunk that down to having to do 4 or 5 things, right, to be successful, right? You never get down to just the one.
So what's the best practice around that organizationally? Is that just a component of IT, the shared service part, or is it its own unique part of the organization? How does it fit?
Well, ultimately, sharing requires governance, right? You know, and if people don't get along, then they say those are my marbles, and I don't want to share them with you. Then the organization will never capitalize on it, right? So it's first and foremost a management agreement, right? It has to be a business agreement that, you know, we are going to, you know, play well in the sandbox together, right? And it's, you know, IT is IT, right? You know, it's never a problem with technology, right? I mean, I teach a data analytics class, and, you know, 9 out of the 10 problems we talk about have nothing to do with data. They have to do with the organizational problems that programs are having moving their governance forward, right? So it first and foremost has got to be an executive conversation about the virtue of sharing, and you know, and then IT will easily be able to be the enabler and support that if you have the executive support.
That's an easy one.
Well, it's, yeah, easily. I gotta strike easy from my vocabulary. Nothing's easy in this world.
Never
Right.
say surely, never say
Yeah.
easy. But I think, you know, you know, I'll continue to beat the drum around the, you know, sort of BPR, OCM, you know, the change management piece, that human capital piece. And it's, you know, I think where it's, you know, as we, you know, sort of circle back to the whole customer-centric discussion, you know, it's not just internal, it's the external questions that we need to answer, right? It's like we don't want to answer questions that no one asked. You know, it's the, you know, how do we provide services, you know, utilizing these new technologies, you know, how do we provide the services that people really want and they, you know, can consume and desire. And then on the flip side, you know, internally, how do you change the mission of what your people are doing on a day-to-day basis? You know, because they, again, it's back to that discussion, you know, they're not moving paper anymore. You know, we all, you know, see, you know, boxes of paper and cubes filled with paper, and as that, you know, reliance goes away, you know, how do you transform their job? And that's, you know, I think that is the, you know, one of the biggest keys, you know, to that successful transformation, and the ability to provide a real client-centric model is, you know, not just pushing tools to the client that they can use, but then, you know, transforming the job of, you know, the, you know, public sector worker so that they are, you know, providing a new kind of service or a new, you know, they have a new responsibility in this model. And, you know, that really often gets overlooked. You know, sometimes it happens kind of organically, but that organic, you know, journey is really difficult and it's painful. You know, people are very resistant to it, so it's bringing them along slowly and helping them, you know, define what that role is going to look like.
Expanding on the shared services, has there been any discussion as far as departments as a whole, as a state, agencies going out and developing these new IT systems, and so that other people, other departments, theoretically there should be another department that's similar to this one, being able to use those? Because what we found is that when we go to, coming from an HR standpoint and trying to get another database or another system, it's so customized that they're like, well, you can have it, we won't service it, and you kind of need us because we built it for you to even be able to run it. And then so it's kind of like, well, and it's outdated by 10 years. So has there been a discussion like just expanding on like the shared service within the department as far as just statewide?
Yeah.
So, I mean, somebody has to go over the hill first.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Somebody's got to flinch, right? And you know, I will tell you, and you know, I mean, I have my own experiences here, you know, as a, you know, on the civil service side of, you know, state government. Dale does as well. Chris, you've worked elsewhere. California is a little unique, right, in that it's got a very large scale, and these departments have always had, by relative standards, very large staffs, very large budgets, and so forth, and have gotten themselves over time into very specific situations. So, you know, trying to turn, you know, the Queen Mary on a dime is not necessarily an easy feat. But as you say, if somebody flinches first, right? Smaller states have dealt with this, you know, before, right? Because they didn't have the economic means to build these silos and to support these silos for decades. They were forced into sharing, right? And so, you know, the practices, the governance is no different, right? I mean, if you're a smaller state, it's the same between, you know, I mean, I worked in the Department, you know, of, or in Business, Transportation, and Housing here, so anybody that was from that former agency, knows that, every agency has somebody that's special, right? CHP was always different, right? They go, oh, we're law enforcement, right? So we can't do what everybody else is doing because we're law enforcement, right? But you go down to a county level, you have the sheriff says the same thing. Oh, we're different, we're law enforcement. You go down to the city level, they go, oh, we're police department, we're different, right? Everybody has, at all tiers of government, at all sizes of states, these same problems, right? These are solvable, right? But it does require somebody to flinch first. One of the clients that we're working with, made that decision. They said, we want you to build these systems for us, and we're willing to be the first customer for this. We know that, in this case, it was a Medicaid agency. They said, we want you to be able to deliver enterprise content management to us through our enterprise service bus, but we want you to deliver it to us as if we are just one of many users of this system, right? So we built it out first as a generic capability, and then exposed it as a service through the ESB to them, so that then the next agency could participate. So it was built as a highway for a single car, right, to begin with, but it has the on-ramps and off-ramps to allow others to join, right? And they made that leadership decision that they wanted to do that, right? Not knowing for sure that anybody else would ever jump on, right? But that they were willing to be the first one up and over the hill, right? And they bound themselves to that. And in the process, we were able to negotiate a statewide license for that enterprise content management solution for them, so that all citizen interaction and the entire state's population is licensed to be able to upload and download content now through that. And so any agency that now comes on only has to pay their seats for their individuals, right? Very, very powerful, right? But it took the leadership of a single organization to say, we're willing to be first, and we're not going to build something that's so customized to us that nobody else will be able to use it, right? They committed themselves to the idea of sharing.
Okay, we are getting close,
Really close
to the end, so let's kind of just tie this all back together again into a nice, pretty bow here. So how does all of this create that customer centricity that we really value you, our citizen, our taxpayer, people that are footing the bill, and we understand that your expectations have shifted, and how do we meet those expectations?
Yeah. So I mean, I think again back to some of these same thematic, lessons. I think as Craig was talking about, having those shared services. It can be everything from shared IT, something like a enterprise content management solution, but it can also be functionality. I mean there is not obviously a one-size-fits-all for something like case management. I mean, there is some uniqueness within the system or systems, but it's looking at sort of that commonality. How do you provide people with a at both the client level and at the worker level with views across different either programs or services. And again, the old model of people walking into a government office to receive services, standing in a line, and it's in a human services environment that you shuddered, right? It was, it was, and sometimes from a program perspective, it was very difficult because there were, different lines for different programs. So how do you provide that more seamless interaction at a service level? And so things like portals, things like mobile technologies, and I think the work around that is not insignificant. We have our mobile and digital team that is always beating on us about user experience, and we spend an enormous amount of time on the technology for sure, but we spend an equal or more amount of time really trying to solve that user experience problem. And again, it's that what questions are we really trying to answer? What problems are we really trying to solve, through use of these technologies? And I think that's, it is both a, sort of organizational and an IT, problem.
Yeah, no, well stated, Chris. I mean, from my standpoint, it comes back maybe to the question you were asking about, breaking down the barrier between IT and the business plan, right? So if you think about, you just have that business plan, and you think about you have this desire to push, right? You want to be able to push these transactions out to make your own organization more efficient. And I think that, the point that Chris has, made wonderfully is you can only push what somebody's willing to pull, right? And so finding the balance, and then, dealing with the feasibility that you have, right? Do you have data issues? Do you have system issues, right? And working through the challenges of those barriers to come up with an actionable plan that allows you to seek some kind of harmony and build the momentum around it, starting small and, working that forward. I think if we look at, the successes that agencies have had in, moving things forward, right? The reasons that people have, adopted, some of these, offline or, online processes has been because it really was a marriage of the push and the pull, right? The reason that people like ATMs is at the end of the day, it's actually easier for them, right? The banking industry found a way to make something that was economically efficient for them, also good for, for the customer. And I think that's where we're going to see, ultimately those things happen. And in the short run, if you are laden with a lot of, transactional or system problems, you're probably going to need to look for, things that don't require exposing your historical data and so forth, out to the web. Like I said, I know CalPERS spent an enormous amount of time doing that because it was imperative for its mission, but it isn't necessarily for every single solution.
That's right. So there's kind of like some vision out there of what this really kind of boils down to. How many people use DMV online now versus going into a wonderful field office, right? My wife was part of that project, and as part of EDD, we were talking about single sign-on. DMV is investing a lot of money in a sign-on system, but why is that a different sign-on than something I would use at EDD or something that I would use at in a health and human services scenario, or even if I wanted to renew my fishing license or go to a park and pay for that sucker online, why doesn't the state have a single sign-on? And we've talked about it, and there is architecture in place to take us there. The barrier is the business people don't agree that single sign-on is good for citizens. And maybe they should use DMV and some of these other services more because they would soon find out that that's a pain in the butt to have different sign-ons for all these systems, right? So the examples are out there of what the citizen centricity is all about. And it is that convenience factor. And I, when my kids are starting to run this place, they're going to demand it because they know that it can happen. Because they just order through Amazon, and yeah, it just happens, and they expect it. So I think we're out of time. KPMG does have a booth, and we are specialized in this field. So come visit us. We'll talk more about it. We'd love to talk about re-engineering and transformation. We actually have an evolution management roadmap too that we would love to speak to you about. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks.